Hello, good morning. And my name is Nigel Holmes. I head up the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, and we're doing this joint event with the Hydrogen Center Bavaria on Make It, Move It, Use It, building the market for green hydrogen, both in Scotland and Bavaria. So this is a joint event, and we're going to be looking at the Scottish and Bavarian perspectives on developing the early market for clean hydrogen in both of our regions. So I'd like to start with a few slides just to set the scene in terms of what's happening with the build-up of hydrogen activities in Scotland. And that will be followed by a similar introduction by Carolyn Reiser of the Hydrogen Bavarian Centre about activities in Bavaria. So, Scotland and Bavaria and partnerships for scaling up hydrogen. The background to this is that Scotland has set a target for net zero by 2045, and the annual electricity demand in Scotland is now almost all met by renewables, much of this from wind. The Scottish Government has set targets for scaling up hydrogen production demand, 5 gigawatts production by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. But as well as these targets for Scottish production of hydrogen, the important part here is that earlier this year, June 2022 in Glasgow, the ministers of Bavaria and Scotland signed an MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, on cooperation on hydrogen. And at the same time, the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association and Hydrogen Center Bavaria also signed a MOU to develop joint activities to support our members and sector growth. And this will be key going forward. And this webinar is very much about looking at some of the early opportunities for scaling up green hydrogen production and use, very much on the way of starting to create that early demand so we can then move towards the much larger quantities in the late 2020s, 30s, and through to the 40s. So the policy background was set by the Scottish Government. This was in December 2020, so slightly later than the German hydrogen strategy, which came out, I believe, in June 2020. But it also has some very strong ambitions around the production capacity for green hydrogen, 5 gigawatts by 2030, scaling up to 25 gigawatts by 2045. And the big driver behind this all will be renewables, the capacity for production of renewables in Scotland. As people say quite often, Scotland, there's plenty of wind and there's plenty of rain. So we have a great wind and hydro resource. We do get some sunshine, and that will be playing a part in the future as well. But we believe that wind will be the dominant form of renewable generation in Scotland through to the 2040s. And much of this will be offshore wind. So we already have about 9 gigawatts of onshore wind, about 1 gigawatt of offshore. And by 2030, we expect to see more than a doubling of onshore wind and probably about an extra 11 to 12 gigawatts of offshore wind. And then starting to see some very substantial growth with the activities called ScotWind. So ScotWind, you may hear this mentioned a few times during the event today. The Scottish Government actually is leasing areas of the seabed around Scotland, and the round that was completed this year identified 25 gigawatts, in fact, no, 28 gigawatts of leases were signed off for development of offshore wind. And many of these projects are now looking at also using this renewable energy capacity for green hydrogen production, possibly for making ammonia or methanol or other similar power-to-X products. So that's coming through, but what I'd like to mention very quickly is some of the activities happening around Scotland already. So I'm going to take you on a quick tour around Scotland, starting just north of Edinburgh in a town called Methil, just across the river from Edinburgh, then move up to Aberdeen, Cromarty and Orkney, just to find out what's been happening. And Methil the picture you see here on the right, you can see that this is right by the sea. There is a big dock. That dock used to export coal. Methil was a big coal producing site. No more. That finished probably 30, 40 years ago. And now the main activities around Methil are to do with, for example, the hydrogen office, which is the building, the triangular bit, the diagonal building you can see in the middle here, next to the dock, and also the links into renewable energy, for example, with wind and solar. And together, this has actually helped to develop a good understanding of the opportunity. Also, a lot of outreach in Methil with schools and colleges and the local population. And the picture you can see on the left here, there is now a large offshore wind turbine, just offshore. It's about 100 meters from the shoreline. And this will be used to power an electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen. And the hydrogen is going to go to about 300 households in the local area instead of using natural gas. So this is an opt-in trial. The householders will have a choice between natural gas or hydrogen. So this is an important trial, both for building up the use of hydrogen for heat, but also stimulating some of the early demand for hydrogen. And within a couple of years, hopefully we'll be able to give you some updates around the experience for the households, the use of the hydrogen in domestic heating and cooking. Moving slightly north, about 100 kilometres north of Methil, on the east coast of Scotland, Aberdeen used to be known as the oil and gas capital of UK, Europe, a big hub for oil and gas exploration, production and technical support, but now very much looking at energy transition. And one of the main activities that Aberdeen has been leading is around the deployment of hydrogen fuel cell buses in the city fleet. And again, this is a European funded project. This has been supported by the Clean Hydrogen Partnership, opened in 2015 with 10 single-decker buses. It's carried over 2 million passengers. We now have a fleet of 15 double-decker buses running around Aberdeen. And it's been a great success in terms of the reliability of the refueling. Also in Aberdeen is activities around using offshore wind for producing hydrogen. These are projects in development, so they are not yet installed, but they should be coming in a couple of years' time. And the key thing here is the floating offshore wind platform also has the hydrogen production. So this schematic you can see above with a couple of the sites, the yellow line going back to the beach is actually, that's a hydrogen pipeline. So there is no electrical connection between the floating offshore wind and the land. It's all done by hydrogen pipeline. And this is important for deploying offshore wind into the deeper areas around Scotland, further away from the shore, where the cost of the pipelines could be much more approachable than the cost of doing it by direct electrification. And indeed, the bigger picture of the North Sea, there is a lot of experience and infrastructure from the oil and gas sector, pipelines, experience with working offshore that will be important for the scaling up of green hydrogen using offshore wind. And on this map, you can just see just up the coast from Aberdeen, you can see a site called Cromarty, and that's our next stop to see what's happening with the development of green energy port hubs. And you'll hear a lot more about this from our speakers later on, Joanne Alday, Port of Cromarty Firth, and Tim Dumenil of Storegga. So I won't spend too long on this one, just to say that Cromarty is come onto our radar very recently in 2020. This started to be looked at seriously by the Port of Cromarty Firth. A year later, they were actually signing agreements with Scottish Power for launching the North of Scotland Hydrogen Hub and electrolyzer capacity at Cromarty. And the development of the concept for the green energy port hubs is bringing together the production, the demand, and the infrastructure that you can use to move the hydrogen around. Some of it moving the hydrogen potentially down to Inverness, the city of Inverness, about 30 kilometres away, and also the port for export into wider markets, including Europe. Now moving up to Orkney, and the Orkney Islands just off the northern tip of Scotland, about 25,000 people. And very much at the leading edge of deploying renewables. And by 2014, they're actually producing more renewable electricity on an annual basis than they were consuming. So very much a leading location. But that brought its challenges around the capacity and the constraints of putting more wind onto the electricity networks. And again, with European support, there's been a number of projects taking part in Orkney. One of the projects that the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association was involved with was Big Hit. That started in 2016. It concluded earlier this year. And that was about establishing the hydrogen production on islands in Orkney, which can be used then to take surplus renewable electricity, convert it to hydrogen, and then store it and transport it to other locations for different uses. So this schematic shows the two locations that are currently most important in Orkney, Chappensea and Edy to the north, and production of the hydrogen from renewables using electrolyzers. So a 1 megawatt electrolyzer on Chappensea and a slightly smaller electrolyzer on Edy. And this has actually allowed us to get a lot of experience about production of the hydrogen from renewables, and it's not always straightforward. You have to match the capacity of the electrolyzer with the availability of renewables very carefully, but also moving it and using it and moving it between islands. That's been a big learning journey around putting the hydrogen in tube trailers. You can see a couple of them on the left and the right of the front of the picture here, moving them by ferry, and there are some specific safety standards for moving flammable materials by ferry, and then using it. And at the harbour here, there's actually a fuel cell in the blue box on the left. It's actually a proton motor fuel cell system, which produces electricity for ships that are in the harbour, and some of the byproduct heat is used for heating the local buildings. So very much, as I say, learning by doing, and we're starting to share some of the experience from Orkney with other EU projects, specifically the Heaven project in Groningen, North Netherlands, and the Green Highland project in the island of Mallorca, near Spain. So you're thinking, oh, that's fine, but it's quite small. So why does that matter? Well, if we look at what's going to happen next in Orkney, as part of the ScotWind bids, there's actually a large bid in for areas to the east and west of Orkney, multiple gigawatts of wind capacity. And in Orkney, there is actually a location currently used for oil and gas, actually mainly oil, which could be repurposed to being a hydrogen or power to X hub for Orkney. And so this is about not just looking at the small projects, but actually seeing them as a stepping stone towards much larger deployments. Orkney and Shetland are two locations. The Western Isles could be very similar. So these are potentially, rather than having energy islands being created, we have islands already which are in good locations and can be repurposed from oil and gas to green energy, clean energy hubs for the future. And that matters because we can then see a pathway going forward towards starting to export that surplus capacity of energy, either as hydrogen or methanol or ammonia, into adjacent markets. So this picture shows very clearly the potential of renewable energy production across Europe. The areas that have a surplus are in green. The ones that are in deficit are shown in red or orange. And going forward, this can actually help us to supply the markets in Europe, adjacent markets where there is a demand for hydrogen and clean energy. This could be by shipping, or potentially going forward, it could be by pipeline. So pipelines connecting together different locations around Europe could then start to become a hydrogen backbone that allows us to move that energy efficiently and at the lowest possible cost between different locations at large scale. So just to summarize, Scotland's got the targets for building up. We have the potential to start to actually produce. And this webinar is a good example of how we can then start to link together the activities between Scotland and Bavaria and start to make things happen on a practical level. So I'm now going to conclude and stop my sharing and ask Carolyn if you could then pick up your introduction to the activities in Bavaria.
Yeah, thank you, Nigel. I will then share my screen with you as well. I hope it works. If you could.
That's perfect. Yep.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for the feedback. Okay. Yeah. Hello, everyone, and also a warm welcome from my side to the webinar on the hydrogen markets in Scotland and Bavaria. My name is Caroline Reiser, and I'm international manager for international affairs at the Center Hydrogen Bavaria, or short H2B. To all the international and Scottish participants we have today, and which don't know the H2B yet, I'd like to give you a short introduction and a short overview of the Center Hydrogen Bavaria, the Hydrogen Alliance Bavaria, as well as the Bavarian Hydrogen Strategy. To all our partners in the Hydrogen Alliance Bavaria, you've probably seen this presentation multiple times now. So if that's the case, feel free to make a short coffee break and come back in around 8 minutes. For all the others, a first introduction into the H2B. So the H2B is a state-financed strategy and coordination center for hydrogen-related topic in Bavaria. Our goal is to strengthen the Bavarian hydrogen economy. We also promote a large-scale rollout of hydrogen in various applications, and we advise, inform, and connect the Bavarian hydrogen players in our network. Our tasks include the development of strategies and the roadmap. I will get back into the strategy process in the second part of my presentation. We also do advice to the Bavarian government. We are involved in demonstrations and analyses. So, for example, about countries and technologies. Public relation is also an important topic in order to provide information about the activities in the field of hydrogen in Bavaria, and we also organize networking events. And finally, we coordinate the Hydrogen Alliance Bavaria. This is a networking, information, and interest platform and serves as a loose network of hydrogen players in Bavaria. Currently, we have more than 280 partners in the hydrogen network, and for them, we offer different services in order to provide the partners with networking opportunities and a chance to exchange information. Here you have a quick overview of the partners in the Hydrogen Alliance Bavaria. So we started in 2019 with 18 partners, and since then we've grown a lot, as you can see from the right side of the slide, with a lot of logos. Also, since this year, we have 2 strategic partners, and one of which is the Scottish Hydrogen and Fuel Cell Association, or short SHEFCA, from Scotland. And our Hydrogen Alliance represents a diverse alliance and a diverse network, including big but also medium and small companies. We have startups, we have research institutes, universities, but also associations and clusters that are part of our network. And they cover basically the entire value chain of hydrogen with a variety of activities and interests. So Bavaria is probably quite well known for you because of the mobility sector, but we also have many, many companies that are involved in different activities, like in the chemical industry or in logistics or in the area of investment and financing. And the Hydrogen Alliance also includes market and technology leaders of various fields. On the slide, you can also see the classification of our partners, as well as their spatial distribution in Bavaria. So there are the centers in Munich and Nuremberg, but basically the partners are located throughout Bavaria. Next, I would like to give you a short overview of the Bavarian hydrogen strategy and the strategy process. So the strategy process started in May 2020 with the publication of our position paper. And this was developed by the H2B and the Hydrogen Alliance. And this paper also served as a basis for the Bavarian hydrogen strategy, which was published at the same time. And at the end of April this year, we presented our Hydrogen Roadmap Bavaria, which outlines the next steps to ramp up the Bavarian hydrogen economy. I'd like to give you a bit more details regarding the content of the Bavarian hydrogen strategy and the Bavarian roadmap. So the hydrogen strategy was published by the Bavarian Ministry of Economic Affairs, Regional Development and Energy, and puts a strong focus on green hydrogen and its use in mobility. Since Bavaria has only limited resources or limited potential for renewable energy and the production of green hydrogen, at least when we compare it to other regions and countries in the world, the strategy supports hydrogen imports from other countries to Bavaria and technology exports from Bavaria. And for this purpose, various implementation steps have been defined. The most important or most interesting one might be the funding program for hydrogen refueling stations in order to promote hydrogen applications in transport. Another implementation step consists of the Hydrogen Roadmap Bavaria. And here the goal was to define concrete milestones on the way to a hydrogen economy and to show perspectives and recommendations for action. And furthermore, the roadmap aims to estimate the possible hydrogen demand for the next few years. It is important to note that the war in Ukraine and the energy policy consequences have not been included in the paper, as the writing had already been completed at that time. So the demand forecast that we made really should be seen as a minimum, and we expect an increasing importance of hydrogen imports in the medium term. So regarding hydrogen demand and supply in Bavaria, so we estimated a cumulative demand of up to 33 to 75 terawatt hours by 2040. So therefore, the demand for hydrogen in Bavaria alone in 2040 could exceed the hydrogen demand that we currently have in Germany. And the sectors with the highest demand include mobility and the petrochemical industry, but also power and heat generation. Regarding hydrogen supply, so we recommend to install at least 1 gigawatt of electrolysis capacity by 2030 in Bavaria. However, this will probably not be enough to meet the growing demand in Bavaria for hydrogen. And therefore, the Bavarian and the German governments are really active in promoting energy partnerships and also international cooperations on hydrogen. And countries with a lot of potential for renewable energy, like Scotland, with a lot of onshore and offshore wind energy, are therefore especially relevant for us. An important aspect, however, to note is the hydrogen infrastructure. So as you're all familiar with, there are different forms available of hydrogen. So hydrogen could either be in a liquid state, in a gaseous state, chemically bound, or we could use derivatives. And depending on the form, there are different transport methods applicable. And for Germany, we have, we seek to get an early access to the European hydrogen backbone. And currently, there are 5 possible import corridors that are really important to us. And regarding Scotland and Bavaria, the North Sea corridor is the most important one. And yeah, in order to ramp up the projects between Bavaria and Scotland, we have organized this event to give you an insight on the 2 markets and the current activities. So therefore, I wish you an exciting webinar today. And in case you're interested in our partners or in our activities that we do in the H2B, feel free to contact me or my colleagues from the H2B, and we are happy to help. Here you can see our services once again, and also our contact details. Also, during the webinar, feel free to ask questions. You have the button, Q&A button, where you can just post your questions, and then feel free to ask our speakers. And with that, I would like to finish my presentation. Thank you very much. And then I would like to hand back to Nigel.
Thank you very much. That's a really useful introduction to the activities happening in Bavaria and some of the key issues around energy supply into Bavaria. And I think our next speaker will touch on this as well. So David Scrimger, DS Consulting, one of our global Scots, has been in Bavaria for many years, and has also been working very closely with the Bavarian government, building links with Scotland. Previously in 2017, there was a MOU put in place with Scotland and Bavaria on renewable energy, and David was very closely involved in this. And David is now going to take a leading role going forward with the hydrogen activities between Scotland and Bavaria, helping to make relevant introductions between organisations. But David, over to you, and you can give us a bit more about your background and the activities going forward.
Thanks, Nigel. I'll just call up my presentation. Can you see that?
That's all good. Thanks, David.
Okay.
You'll need to go full
yep.
screen on the, that's it. That's perfect.
Yep. Okay, good. I'll introduce myself in a second. You've heard quite a lot about Scotland, and just to summarise, you see the map on the left. That is a combination of the onshore hydrogen hubs that have been identified as potential hubs by the Scottish Government. And you see the, as you've already seen, the offshore wind potential. So the point I'm making here with this is the Scot-to-Ger project, which is a simple proposition, which is all about the export of green hydrogen produced from onshore wind prior to 2030 to Germany, to be followed up then by production, as you've heard, of hydrogen, green hydrogen produced from offshore wind. And fundamentally, we have, before 2030, we expect to have 20 gigawatts of onshore wind installed, and quite a piece of that available for hydrogen production. And then we have offshore wind by following 2030 with a likely installed capacity of around 40 gigawatts, and maybe half of that, perhaps more, available for hydrogen production and meeting local demand, and also for export. Maybe just one to pick out on this is Orion up here in the north, the far north, in Shetland Islands. It's an interesting project, not least because one of the main energy companies in the UK, SSE, is building a 440 megawatt onshore wind park, some of which may be dedicated to hydrogen. And just to note that the capacity factor of that onshore wind farm is very similar to offshore. In other words, it's a very windy place. And then on the right, I thought I'd put that in just to demonstrate there is, particularly in this situation with political chaos in the UK, it might be interesting for the Bavarian participants to be aware that Scotland voted by a quite substantial majority against Brexit. That means Scotland wants to be part of the UK, of Europe, also part of the UK. Yeah, so quickly on then, as Nigel said, and as Caroline said, I think too, there was a visit by Minister Aiwanger on the 13th June. You can see the German text there, which is basically, as Caroline said, about the import of green hydrogen to Bavaria and the export of technology from Bavaria to Scotland, which is really a win-win situation for both countries, because we don't have the full supply chain for scale production of hydrogen in Scotland, and as we've heard, Bavaria has a need for imports of green hydrogen. And that was the continuing text of the agreement, which is basically saying, you know, the Bavarian government will support projects of various kinds, including pilot projects, demonstration projects, and the focus will be on the Scottish Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association and the Wasserstoff.Bayern as main players in terms of organising the cooperation between Bavaria and Scotland. On the right, you see the group that visited Scotland, actually Glasgow and Aberdeen in June. And this is me. I have a contract now with the Bavarian government to help Bavarian companies connect with organisations in Scotland. My background is I've been in Germany in Munich actually for over 30 years. I've had a business here consulting with governments and corporates over that time, since 2000. And then before that, I was actually, which is very relevant here, I was the investment director for the Scottish government. That means getting investment from Germany and Austria, getting companies from Germany and Austria to invest in Scotland, so foreign direct investment. And before that, I worked as a lawyer in Munich and before that in Edinburgh. I've always been involved in Scottish business, Scottish Bavarian business. I've always tried. I had a website doing travel support and accommodation booking and so forth, together with my wife. And then, as Nigel said, 2017, I organised a trip for the then Economics and Energy Minister, Aigner, to Scotland with 25 companies. And then since 2019, I've been developing the Scot2Ger project with Scottish and Bavarian partners. So these are the organisations which are available for contact depending on the nature of the inquiry. I can introduce Bavarian companies to, as appropriate, to these organisations. The main one is here, Scottish Enterprise, which is the main economic development agency for Scotland, and below that is the Economic Development Agency for the Highlands and Islands, and another agency covering the south of Scotland. So depending on the nature of the inquiry and what the Bavarian company wants to achieve, then I can put through both through the Scottish Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association and the Wasserstoff.Bayern, working together with them, I can support inquiries from Bavarian companies. But I have to say, there's a lot of interest in Scotland and in sourcing green hydrogen from Scotland. There are many agreements now in place. There are lots of visits happening, with more to come. Baden-Württemberg at the end of next month, North Rhine-Westphalia in the first quarter of next year. I'm in contact with all of these governments and others about Scot2Ger. So the message would be, Bavaria needs to get going, up its game. We can supply large-scale green hydrogen after 2030 by pipeline from the North Sea, but it's going to come in at the north. So to make sure it's going to get down to Bavaria, this cooperation with Scotland is an important opportunity. And these are my contact details. Feel free to contact me or come through the Wasserstoff.Bayern. Happy to help where I can. Thanks very much.
David, thank you very much. So yeah, that sets some of the background context, the links that have already been established between Scotland and Bavaria. And we'll be talking a bit more later on about what happens next with these joint activities. But the next part of the event is to actually home in on one area of Scotland, and I mentioned it earlier in my introduction. It's the area around Cromarty, the Port of Cromarty Firth, and some of the activities that are starting to build up. And so we're going to hear from two speakers about the Port of Cromarty Firth. We're going to be starting with Tim Dumenil of Storegga. Tim will take us through some of the activities that he's been involved in, go right back to some of the green steel activities, I think, Tim. And then we'll hear from Joanne Alday from the Port of Cromarty Firth about some of the activities they are developing at the port. So, Tim, it's over to you if you want to put your slides up.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks, Nigel. Just get that shared screen going.
That's excellent. Looks good, Tim.
Perfect. Excellent. Right. Good morning, everybody. So Tim Dumenel, I'm the Hydrogen Asset Manager at Storegga. Storegga, we're a decarbonisation developer delivering carbon reduction projects. We've been active in carbon capture and storage and hydrogen for over 15 years through our CO2 Deep Store and Pale Blue Dot companies. 2 years ago, we formed Storegga to enable the inward investment through shareholders who can provide the billions of pounds of infrastructure investment that are needed for the projects that we're developing. But we're active in 3 business units: carbon capture and storage, clean hydrogen, and direct air capture. We're building the world's largest direct air capture plant at Peterhead, 1 million tonnes a year of removal. And finally, we have this Storegga Integrated, which is a full chain carbon management service to help large emitters find routes to sequestration. And Storegga and our Acorn partners are leading the Scottish Industrial Decarbonisation Programme, which aims to capture and sequester a quarter of Scotland's carbon emissions by 2030. So first of all, we need to understand a little bit about some of those carbon emissions. And prior to joining Pale Blue Dot, now Storegga, I was a senior manager with Diageo and heavily involved in energy minimisation and carbon neutral activity within the Scotch whisky sector. And whilst the Scottish whisky sector is a relatively small percentage of overall Scottish energy demand, it does, within certain regions, such as Cromarty, represent the majority of the fossil fuel demand within that local region through their fuel usage for steam generation and heavy goods vehicle logistics. As outlined in this pathway to net zero, it was produced by the Scotch Whisky Association by Ricardo. And as outlined within this pathway to net zero, hydrogen forms a significant percentage of the sector's transition plans. Energy efficiency through process improvement and the integration of electrical high temperature heat pumps, so industrial heat pumps, will reduce the amount of primary energy that is needed by the sector going forward, and therefore reduce the fuel switching requirements from electrification, bioenergy, and hydrogen. And whilst it could be assumed that most industrial heat demand could follow a similar waterfall, this is unlikely to be the case given the inability to secure the very large electrical connections that you need to replace industrial steam boiler capacity, the lack of waste heat recovery opportunity equivalent to the distillery condensers output, and the lack of suitable co-product for anaerobic digestion. So in some cases, in some regions, we'll see hydrogen forming a larger part of that industrial demand. And Storegga has provided input into that Scotch Whisky Association pathway to net zero, as the team have been supporting energy transition for the brewing and distilling sector for nearly 10 years. So we've delivered a number of energy minimization projects and activities for the sector. We created a concept called Green Stills, which was an innovation looking to integrate both into new build and retrofit into existing distilleries high temperature heat pumps to reduce the primary energy usage of distilling by about 50 to 60%. And we've led and created both the Acorn hydrogen projects and Cromarty hydrogen projects, which form part of the North of Scotland hydrogen programme. And the latter will enable the distillers and others to secure sort of fully security of supply for the hydrogen that they're looking to drive their industrial process with going forward. So Cromarty hydrogen. In early 2020, Storegga started Cromarty Hydrogen, and in the first half of 2021, we delivered the feasibility study involving Scottish Power and the Port of Cromarty Firth. And we've created, in that feasibility study, we created a 4-phase vision for a build out starting at about somewhere between 25 and 50 megawatts and building out to a regional solution of about 300 megawatts of electrolysis. And Scottish Power and Storegga are jointly now developing the phase 1. We've done quite a bit of work over the last 12 months, and we're now looking at about 30 megawatts of electrolysis for the phase 1. It'll be at Scottish Power's Ben Tarson onshore wind farm. And together we've customer memorandums of understanding in place with several off-takers, mainly distillers, for that project. And the project seeks to take its final investment decision in August next year, and to commence operation in mid to late 2025. With all of our hydrogen produced directly retailed to the end users and distributed by tube trailers to enable either a blend of hydrogen into the end user sites, or in several cases enabling the end user to switch to 100% hydrogen from their existing fossil fuel usage. Throughout the last 2 years, the Port of Cromarty Firth have been a key stakeholder. They've been chairing the Cromarty Hydrogen Working Group, and the main purpose of that Cromarty Hydrogen Working Group has been to engage the local supply chain within the region, because we need to be able to develop that supply chain and develop other key entities and partners within the region in order to be able to deliver a regional project of this scale. In addition, the Port of Cromarty Firth have been the driving force behind Opportunity Cromarty Firth and its Green Freeport bid, which both Scottish Power and Storegga continue to support, given our aspiration to evolve and grow the hydrogen ambition within the region beyond Cromarty Hydrogen to a sort of gigawatt scale power to X outcome. And what's really interesting about what we've worked on collectively over the past 2 to 3 years is that it can be cookie cutted and replicated into some of the other regional hubs, both within Scotland, as outlined by David in one of his slides, but also in other countries elsewhere, including Germany. The important piece about this is that you have to start with the right-sized phase 1 project, establish that foundational module of hydrogen, and then use that to then build out this sort of regional hydrogen hub. Key piece of that regional hydrogen hub is then looking at the infrastructure to be able to distribute the hydrogen. And so a couple of just quick points on the route to market. So at the moment within the UK, there is a gas safety management regulation that currently does not enable hydrogen to be moved within the existing natural gas pipeline network. There's a cross-party working group that have been working on this for several years now, that are looking to make a decision by the end of next year, by the end of 2023, about enabling a 20% blend of hydrogen into the gas network. But it'll then need a heat policy to come into place in about 2026 before any wide-scale adoption of gas blending or hydrogen blending into the gas network can come into place. So for Cromarty Hydrogen, the phase 1 and phase 2 of the project, the routes to market is going to be tube trailer. Whilst it's more efficient and cost effective to distribute via pipeline, as I've said, the current regulation policy doesn't enable that, and hence the route to market, the initial route to market through a low emission fueled tube trailers delivering compressed hydrogen into the customer sites. And it enables quite a simple, easy sort of business to business route to market and commercial architecture for the project. As Cromarty Hydrogen builds out to its bigger phase 3 and phase 4, we're envisaging the majority of the hydrogen production then being distributed via pipeline, either new build direct private pipeline or repurposing of the existing gas network. The local regional gas network is operated by Scotia Gas Networks, and our plans are very much aligned to SGN's plans, their strategy, their Northeast Scotland and Industrial Cluster strategy, which was published late last year. They outline converting their entire network to 100% hydrogen by 2030. And there's a key piece of legislation within Scotland which requires a carbon reduction at 75% carbon reduction target by 2030. So there's a whole series of things from policy and strategy that are coming together to try and enable an accelerated conversion of the UK gas networks to hydrogen. We have to then sort of say and look at this then from an end user perspective, from the industrial customer, and this is how Cromarty Hydrogen started. We were having various conversations and discussions with the distillers, with the distilling sector across the north of Scotland, and talking to them about the energy trilemma and energy transition. So this energy trilemma is the security of supply, the cost, and carbon emissions. And so, you know, what is the value proposition for hydrogen for industrial use? And when we've spoken to the customers that and we're specific to this energy trilemma, you know, that their sustainability director will say, well, I need to meet my net zero target for my ESG sort of reporting. Whereas the procurement director will say, well, I need the lowest energy cost to underpin my industrial operation going forward, whether that's for feedstock, heavy heat, or heavy transport requirements. And but also that procurement director is going to be focused on the predictability and the security of energy cost, which we've seen really play out in the into the international domain just in the past 6 months in terms of energy security and therefore the cost security around natural gas in particular. But ultimately, it comes down to the operations director, who is really going to focus on security of supply. The UK gas network and electricity network today provide a very high availability, greater than 99% availability, and therefore a very high security of supply. And so the industrial users going forward, when they're looking at hydrogen as part of their mix, security of supply and security of cost are going to be key aspects for the decision making of these industrial users. And therefore, it's really important that we work with them as a developer and we almost reverse engineer our hydrogen production solutions to be able to meet this quite complex picture of dynamics that the end users are seeing. Okay. One last point around this slide is in terms of price and you know, historically the price of energy is likely to have driven this decision. But today we need to think about what the counterfactual fuel cost is going to be. You know, is it going to be the relatively lower cost of natural gas in the past, or is it the current very high cost of natural gas, which is driven by the energy security or insecurity and the market price of natural gas today? Or do we need to look a bit further forward into the future and think about what net zero actually is going to mean physically in terms of the primary energies that are available, that needs to take into consideration progressive carbon pricing, the decoupling of the electricity price from the gas price within the UK, and the ongoing reduction in electricity price, particularly when we see the gigawatts of onshore and offshore wind deployment that is being planned as outlined by Nigel and David earlier. So whilst the energy trilemma is going to be bespoke to each customer, you know, one thing is clear for feedstock, for heavy heat, and for heavy transport, you know, the security of cost, but more so the security of supply is going to be key for these end users, and therefore it's really important that the hydrogen projects continue to work with the end users on a full chain solution. So just through to my final slide now. Again, as David touched on briefly a little bit earlier on, the Scottish Government's draft Hydrogen Action Plan, which was published in November last year, proposes 13 regional energy hubs across Scotland. And 3 of these, Aberdeen, Fife, and Grangemouth, plan to develop a regional hub centered around large-scale modular blue hydrogen production, linked to the natural gas that all flows in through the North Sea and down through Scotland. But these 3 hubs also plan to develop and build out significant green hydrogen production capacity. The remaining 10 hubs across Scotland are going to develop as green hydrogen hubs, converting existing constrained renewable power and this new build renewable power into hydrogen. So each of these hubs will initially meet their local or regional fuel switching demand, but several of these hubs are then going to grow beyond meeting the regional demand into significant export locations. And as was mentioned earlier, Scotland plans to expand its onshore and offshore wind generation capacity from its existing 11 gigawatts, with a further 40 gigawatts being deployed within the next 10 to 15 years. And this will enable several of these hydrogen production hubs to become what's known as super places, where significant quantities of hydrogen can be produced to meet local demand, but also to be deployed internationally to be able to meet the scale of industrial demand and provide that required security of supply through interconnections such as the pipeline interconnectivity that was outlined on one of the slides earlier, through Project Union within the UK and the European hydrogen backbone. And so whilst smaller regional projects such as Cromarty can start with road haul, the project's build out will require this policy and regulatory changes on the gas network blending and conversion to enable the project to logistically and cost effectively service the regional industrial hydrogen demand. But we've also got great port infrastructure within the region. And so I'm going to hand over to Joanne now, who can give you further information on the wider hydrogen opportunity for the Cromarty region, and in particular, the potential to be able to develop Cromarty as a major hydrogen export hub. So thank you very much.
Thanks, Tim. I will just share my screen. Guten Tag, everyone. I hope you're having a good day. I'm honoured to be here to talk to you today. I have a particular love for Germany and have spent time in both Bayern and Baden-Württemberg and really enjoyed being in both. So as I say, delighted to be with you today and happy to talk you through our hydrogen hub in a little bit more detail. So as Tim has introduced, I have been facilitating the North of Scotland Hydrogen Hub centred around the Port of Cromarty Firth. You can see the port here on the right-hand side. Just to give you an idea of size and scale, you can probably see the pickup truck here. These are the towers for the Moray East offshore wind farm, and this is the 2 megawatt demonstrator from the Kincardine floating wind farm. And in the background, you'll be able to see the oil rigs that we store as well. So we're used to dealing with very large bits of kit in the Cromarty Firth. We're also going to have a huge amount of wind industry happening here and in and around our region, which is really what places us at the centre of the hydrogen sector as well. So in terms of why Cromarty Firth, this is a map of the ScotWind projects that were announced before clearing. So we now have 28 gigawatts that has been awarded in Scotland, and we are really at the centre of those sites. So if I can use my mouse, we sit in here. So we're in very, very close proximity to the northeast sites. All of the floating wind sites in the east sector are also members of Opportunity Cromarty Firth, and we're also in discussions with some of the sites up in the north as well. So huge amount of offshore wind to be built out, and at the moment Scotland's energy needs are pretty much being met by the renewable industry that's already been put into place from onshore wind, hydro, and also offshore wind. So this additional, within talk about 30 gigawatts of offshore wind is all pretty much surplus. So therefore is ready to be exported to other countries and to help them with their energy security and their transition to net zero. So we believe that we're in the right place at the right time with all of these opportunities. And Scottish Government, as has been alluded to throughout the webinar so far, they are very, very keen to become a leading exporter of energy, including hydrogen, in the future. So this capacity that is being delivered through ScotWind is very, very significant. It is a step change in delivery of offshore wind in Scotland. But importantly, it makes us kind of a central place for that wind to come into, the wind electricity to come into, and then be converted into hydrogen. And one of the things that is driving that for our region is the grid constraint issues. In the Highlands of Scotland, we have more people putting into the grid than taking out of the grid. So we're one of the most expensive places in the country for offshore wind developers to be connecting into the grid. So a number of them now, with the capacity that's about to be built out, are actively pursuing other alternatives, and hydrogen being one of the prime alternatives for them. So in terms of our ambition and this is our master plan, these are all live conversations that are taking place. And as Tim alluded to, we established the North of Scotland Hydrogen Working Group probably about 2 years ago now, and started really trying to quantify the demand across the region, because we knew that anybody that wanted to build a project would need to know who's going to buy the hydrogen to begin with. And we always hoped that export would be a very large industry for us in time, but we need that regional demand first to really get these projects up and running. So we very much took a regional approach to this. And as I say, all of the conversations that you can see on here are real life conversations. So I'll pick out a couple of them. Rail is an interesting one. We are very likely to have hydrogen powered rail to the north and the west of us, because it doesn't make commercial sense to electrify those lines. They're in very remote areas. So it's highly likely that one of the first trials in the UK of hydrogen trains will be to the north of where I'm sitting today. As Tim mentioned, the gas grid as well. The northern extent of the gas grid is Invergordon, which is where our port is based. The gas grid was put in to service the distillery, and also we had an aluminium smelter in the town up until the 1970s. So the gas grid was put in to service industry in here, but does not go any further north. So any businesses and properties, households any further north cannot access that gas grid and have to rely usually on oil and electricity. So there's a real driver by the Highland Council as well to become a hydrogen-based region, because they believe that that's going to be more cost effective in the future for the householders and for schools and businesses, and also give people an alternative to some of the electricity provision. The distillers, I think this project is everybody's favourite project because it started with the distilling companies. We have 3 distillers that were part of our initial feasibility study, which is Glenmorangie, White and Mackay and Diageo. Between them, they have 7 distilleries within our close proximity, and it's those sites that they're initially looking to power using hydrogen, and they all develop luxury brands. So Glenmorangie, most of you will have heard of. White & Mackay has the Dalmore range, which I believe still holds the record for the most expensive bottle of whiskey ever sold. And Diageo obviously have a lot of different brands, including in our region, Muir of Ord is one of their bigger ones. And Singleton, sorry, I should mention that might be more familiar to some of you. So there's a large number of sites that they want to change to net zero. Most of these whiskies that are produced today will be put away for at least 10 years, some of them 20, 25 years. And these distillers know that when those products are bought in 20 years, the people that are buying them are going to want to know that they were manufactured in a way that didn't impact the climate. So for them, they are slightly less price sensitive than perhaps some of the customers that will be buying hydrogen in the future. So they're also not seasonal in terms of their requirements. They require hydrogen year round. So it was a really good customer base to start with and to build a regional hub around. And obviously Tim's background, coming from Diageo, he understands that industry really, really well. So it was a match made in heaven, really, and that we all came together at the same time. We've also got aviation, you'll see on here. We are in discussions with Loganair and Zero Avia with regards to their hydrogen aviation trials. And there are plans for the Highland region to become the first net zero aviation region in the UK. So that's, again, a live project that we're in discussions with in terms of provision of hydrogen in the fairly short to medium term. You'll see a cruise ship in the middle of here as well. Our port welcomes more cruise passengers than any other ports in Scotland. And we have a lot of the very large ships, a lot of them German. So AIDA are a very regular visitor, and the cruise industry themselves have very strong ambitions to decarbonise even further than they have already. And I know they're trialling both battery and also hydrogen in their fleet. So we're really keen to be able to service them and the passengers when they come in during the summer months. And then obviously we have export. We, as I mentioned, are going to have a surplus of power. So we're very keen to be able to export that to help other regions of the UK, but also other parts of Europe to decarbonise and hopefully shore up some of your energy security as well. And we hope that being a relatively close neighbour to Germany, that hopefully you might be more willing to take our hydrogen than maybe to bring it from other parts of the world. So if I move on to the next slide, you'll be able to see some of the demand that we've been able to quantify, and this has been worked on through the working group. So you'll see different demand for different timelines, but also some of the conversations that are live in terms of people and customers that may want to take the hydrogen. You'll notice on the 2024-25 line that we have renewables vessels as well. It's no surprise that the renewable sector that is coming in is wanting to decarbonise their supply chain as well. So there's a number of companies now looking at different technologies for those vessels, including hydrogen. We've mentioned in the middle line about SGN. Also on here, you'll see the Highland Council fleet. So that's our local authority, and they have their own targets to decarbonise and to stop purchasing petrol and diesel powered vehicles by 2025 and then 2030, depending on the size of the vehicle. And so they're very much working closely with us, along with the Highlands and Islands Transport Partnership, to really deliver these alternative fuels so that they can meet their own targets. This is just a list of some of the other projects that we've been working on alongside Storegga and Scottish Power's project, which is probably the kind of a linchpin and the central project within the North of Scotland hydrogen programme. The first one on here is a joint research project that was undertaken with St Andrews University and two companies that are very active in hydrogen research, and they were looking at ammonia fuel cell projects for the marine industry, so solid oxide technology to improve the efficiencies. So that was quite an interesting project, and they're just bidding into the next round so that they can move it on to hopefully a demonstration. There are lots of discussions that I can't tell you about, of course, because they're under non-disclosure agreements and confidentiality agreements, but there are discussions in and around the Cromarty Firth for production plants for green ammonia, methanol, and also concepts for liquid hydrogen. So we are looking at a number of different technologies and a number of different transport methods to move these different hydrogen vectors around and be able to transport them to the places that need them. The powerhouse has been mentioned a couple of times. This was a project set up by Opportunity Cromarty Firth, which Tim mentioned, and it's the plan is for it to become a global centre of excellence for both floating offshore wind and green hydrogen technologies. Now, obviously, we can't become a global centre of excellence with only Scottish people involved, or Scottish businesses or research centres. So with this project in particular, we are very keen to connect with people all around the world who are developing floating wind and green hydrogen so that we can all learn from each other. In most cases, we don't compete. So if we can share lessons learned, hopefully we can accelerate both of those industries. And Scotland is likely to be the place where these both sectors are going to be installed at scale quite quickly. So we hope that we can then share some of those lessons learned and help other countries with their decarbonisation journey as well. This is a graphic you'll be familiar with now because Tim showed it earlier. This is the wider plans and how the hydrogen hub fits in to the plans for the Cromarty Firth to become a strategic hub for offshore wind and floating offshore wind in particular. So again, with this growth in the offshore wind industry, there is also a call from government to increase the local content and domestic content of these huge wind farm projects. So the Cromarty Firth has been highlighted in a number of industry and government reports as one of the best places in the UK and the best place in Scotland to build out these projects. So we're looking at manufacturing of floating substructures and also assembly and integration of the turbines and manufacture of a number of different components as this industry really ramps up for delivering this circa 30 gigawatts of offshore wind. In the Cromarty Firth, we have two different port sites that are both more than capable of delivering offshore wind. Currently, we've delivered more projects than any other ports in Scotland, supporting the Beatrice and the East offshore wind farms. And as you saw earlier, Kincardine. We've also supported the Hywind Tampen project. So the plan is that that's going to significantly increase in the coming years, and there will be a shift in the supply chain here as well with more of that capability. We have serviced the oil and gas industry for the last 40 years, and really that is now transitioning into the offshore wind industry. And just to finish is some of the partners. I don't think this is an exhaustive list, but this is the majority of the partners, at least in Opportunity Cromarty Firth, that have really come together to make sure that we achieve green freeport status and can deliver on all of these ambitions for both us and other countries that are going to rely on the power that we're going to produce. And the industry, you'll see a number of very large renewable companies on here, and the industry put a joint letter to government saying that the Cromarty Firth is the only location in Scotland that can deliver at this size and scale. So we're crossing our fingers. Some of you will have been watching our politics of late, I'm sure, with your heads in your hands. So have we. And I'm hopeful that we might in the next week have some sort of stability moving forward, and that they may then be able to make the announcements and let us know who's won that competition. But I hope that's been a good overview for you, and I will welcome your questions later on. Thanks very much.
Joanne, thank you very much. And yeah, that's a really good introduction to all of the work that's going on at the Port of Cromarty Firth. Sarah, if you could put my video back on, that would be great. So our next speaker,
actually on, yeah, right now.
Thank you. Our final speaker before we go into the questions and answers is Mr. Sebastian Schnurr of MAN Energy Solutions. He's been with them many years and is now taking a lead role on some of the renewable energy developments, Power-to-X, and renewable energy solutions for customers and markets. So, Sebastian, over to you.
Nigel, thank you very much for your kind introduction. Hello, everyone. It's also a great pleasure for me to be here. I hope you can all see my screen now. So we've heard a lot about green distilleries with hydrogen. And I already saw one or two questions about how to transport a hydrogen actually from such a hydrogen hub. Now I'm trying to speed up a little bit so that we have some time left for your questions. Let's go into detail a bit more into what we did on green distilleries. So on the left-hand side, you see, let's say, a state-of-the-art distillery. There's some feedstock taking CO2 from the atmosphere while the growth period. Then fossil energy and fuel is used to produce the whiskey, and this produces additional fossil CO2 and other emissions. Now on the right-hand side, if we switch to renewable energy and create renewable fuels via the power-to-gas process, there's the opportunity to have carbon capture utilization, so to close the carbon loop, and you would have no fossil but biogeneous CO2 emissions only, as they are coming from the feedstock. So the example of that is on the left-hand side, traditional business, fossil CO2 emissions. On the right-hand side, net zero CO2 emissions and a closed carbon loop. Now, let's have a bit more detailed, a bit more closer look on the right-hand side concept. Let's start again with the feedstock, which releases CO2 from the fermentation process. Then we add renewable energy. And as I said before, we have applied for this study, this case study, we have applied our power-to-gas system, which comprises of a PEM electrolysis and then a further conversion of the hydrogen together with CO2 to synthetic natural gas, which is basically synthetic methane, in short, SNG here on the right side. This process already produces steam that can be used directly in the distillery steam demand. And then comes the big advantage. Why do we convert the hydrogen in the first place? Because we can use existing infrastructure. In that case, steam boilers, gas lines, storage, everything that is on site already. And then the CO2 from that is released as a green biogenic CO2 in the atmosphere, and the loop is closed. So again, there's no fossil fuel input, and that's the result of that is there is no fossil CO2 emissions, and we have closed the carbon loop. Now, why do we call that a carbon negative distillery here? It's fairly simple. If we use all the CO2 available from this fermentation process, we can produce more fuel actually that is being required on this site. So we could use it for heating homes, for providing fuel to industry, local transport, or even trucking the whiskey from A to B. So all infrastructure available for natural gas today can take up this synthetic methane and also save CO2 there. So that's how we come from a traditional distillery with additional fuel, fossil CO2 emissions, to really a negative distillery. And yeah, we summed that up here. This power to gas process really enables net zero and creates an all new revenue stream. And again, the basic advantage here is really that you can use the existing infrastructure, the existing assets. So that was a very quick jump into the carbon negative distillery project, and we're very curious to see how that continues its development. That was a study for one site of the Glamorganshire distillery, as you can see here. And we're curious to see, and of course, happy to support the further development here. It's also quite nice to see what happens in Port of Cromarty. Now, jumping on, let's say, to the next topic of my presentation, how to transport hydrogen. And in this case, we're speaking of Scottish-Bavarian partnerships, hopefully transporting hydrogen to Germany. Now, why would you do that in the first place? We saw before there are areas that have some surplus of renewable energy, and there are others that are not in surplus that need energy. And Germany has always been a net importer of energy, and projections go that this is not going to change at all just because we change the energy form that we are importing. So Germany is in need of large green hydrogen imports. And even if we target 10 gigawatts of inland electrolysis capacity by 2030, that's not enough at all. So estimations range from 1 to 3 million tons of hydrogen per year that need to be imported from somewhere. So why not from Scotland? But there are questions to that. So one was already asked in the chat here, how do we transport hydrogen in a sensible way? And how can we do that in 2030? So with more or less technology that is existing today. And how do we solve this chicken and egg for a market ramp up? So you need, when you're talking about a ship transport, every ship owner will start laughing at you if you come with a 1 megawatt electrolyzer to him and say, look, can I book some capacity on your ship? So we're talking about large quantities. And how do you find off-takers for large quantities of green hydrogen? So they need some build-up time as well. And what's always interesting, what cost levels can be expected for such green hydrogen transports? So there has a study been released recently from a project in Germany called Green Hydrogen for Salzgitter. For those of you who not know Salzgitter, that's a city near Hanover in the northern, medium northern part of Germany. And this was done within what we call the Wasserstoff campus Salzgitter. In English, this would be the hydrogen campus of Salzgitter. On the right-hand side, you see all those companies who are involved there. So ranging from a company that builds rails and from a large steel producer over to Bosch, which everyone should know, local energy suppliers. The city of Salzgitter participated, and we from MAN had the honors together with the Fraunhofer Institute to lead that study. Now, what did we do actually? See here the complete import chain. So starting from the top left, we have some green power that we use to feed an electrolyzer to produce green hydrogen. Now that's fine, but then you have it in countries like Tunisia, Canada, Australia, and not there where you have the demand. So in order to transport it, we use the conversion into hydrogen carriers. I'll come to what are carriers and which ones are suitable on my next slide. All those carriers can be shipped either in ships that are known today or in ships that yet need to be designed and built. And then there is a reconversion in the target hub, let's say. Here it was the Germany's only deep sea port in Wilhelmshaven, which you see on a sketch here in the middle, and then via a pipeline transported to the city of Salzgitter, where all the industrial or mobility off-takers are placed. Now we have some hydrogen carriers that contain carbon molecules. So, which means you need a carbon source, for example, CO2, to convert hydrogen into those carriers. So what we have planned here is during the reconversion to hydrogen, we capture this CO2, liquefy it, and bring it back to the, let's say, the place of origin, wherever the green power is available at a cheap price. What distinguishes this study from many of those studies that have been published in the recent months and years is we have really tried to include every efficiency, every energy demand, every cost item along this complete chain. And we are not looking in the far ahead future like 2050. So what could be done in an ideal world if I have 20 years from now to develop a new technology, but we have been trying to look at 2030. So what is available until then? Where can we start actually? Now coming back to the hydrogen carriers, a lot of discussion has been ongoing and still is ongoing. Which one of those carriers is the ideal or the best one to carry hydrogen around the world? And I have to say, we realized pretty quickly it's much more than just technology and cost. So you see the whole chain again from the left, from power, electrolysis, conversion, shipping, reconversion, and so on. And you have the 5 major, let's say, hydrogen carriers that are in discussion, which are methanol, ammonia, the synthetic methane, liquefied hydrogen, and a carrier media, LOHC. Now, I said it's more than technology and cost, and we try to evaluate which of those carriers are available until 2030 in terms of do we know how to build such facilities to produce those synthetic fuels or carriers, or are they still in a lab scale? So do we know how to scale up? Have they been proven in an industrial environment? How about the infrastructure you require with this? And of course, what does it cost? And how about the efficiency? Another point that I think was part of one question, how about the handling? Is it safe to handle? Do we know how to handle such carriers? And you see, we have tried to depict this in different colors. So green would mean, yeah, we know how to do this. There is a solid cost base available in public literature. This has been proven in industrial environment. We know how to scale. We know how to deal with that. So everything should be fine. Everyone from the Port of Cromarty project knows, well, that's only on first sight. You need much, much, much more work to do. But in general, everything should be fine. The yellow ones do have some limitations. So for example, speaking of ammonia, this cracking process here, we actually found 2 and not 200, just 2 single sources of publicly available information, how such a facility could look like, what it would cost, and so on. And you see, there's a lot of work to do. Now, the red buttons here, the red symbols really represent a lot of work still to be done in both research, in both development, or even in regulatory things. So regulatory would be the point of issue here for the CO2 loop, for the carbon loop, how to do certification and so on for this international trading. For liquid hydrogen, it's a very, very open question how to ship that. There's one ship traveling from Japan to Australia back and forth from Kawasaki, and they already know, well, it works, but that's not how we're going to do it for larger scale. So, okay, still some work to be done here. For this carrier liquid, what's lacking here is the industrial proof and the scalability for both loading this liquid and unloading. And again, that's, let's say, a summary of publicly available information. But because of that, we have focused on the top 3 carriers, so methanol, ammonia, and synthetic methane, because thinking in a technology in a range of 2030, those are the only ones that are really available. So to start such hydrogen transport chains, by then we need to rely on a mostly existing technology and that's very important, and mostly existing infrastructure as well. Just think about how long it takes to build a pipeline, for example, to build a new terminal. So this is all time we don't have anymore. We need to start now. So now to the most interesting slide, I think, for many of you, what's the cost result of that? And I'll guide you from this from top down. What we've done here are bar charts with different colors. So the first 2 bars are sort of reference cost levels by producing hydrogen from onshore wind in Germany. That's the first one here, around the area of Salzgitter. So there's no real transport required anymore. We are very close to the off-takers. You see that's about €4 per kilogram of hydrogen. And to make sure this is understood correctly, these are all just production cost, no profit margins, nothing incorporated, only production cost. Then if we move a bit further north to the North Sea and produce hydrogen here off the German coast, there's a bit of pipeline transport, but it's not that much. You can almost neglect it. Now let's jump down to North Africa. In this case, it's Tunisia we have chosen to represent Northern African PV generated hydrogen. And you see the cost for hydrogen is much lower. It's well below €3 per kilogram. So it should be fine, right? Well, not completely, because you're still in Tunisia. You're not in the north of Germany or somewhere else where you have the demand. And now the tricky part starts. You need to convert it. And the last 3 bars show now those pathways transporting the hydrogen via ammonia, via methanol, and via synthetic methane. Let's go through those colors. again, you have this small pipeline thing here from the port to the point of use, which is almost negligible. You have the orange piece, which is the ship transport, actually, from North Africa to north of Germany. So it's not that much as well. This doesn't really define the cost. What does define the cost are the conversion into the carrier media and the reconversion, this gray. You see, if you add those in every of those cases, that's really a lot. And what comes on top of that as an addition are losses due to this conversion. So you lose energy by, there are efficiencies of chemical reactions, and you need lots of energy because those are stable molecules, ammonia, methanol, and methane. To break those molecules apart, to get hydrogen again, you need lots of energy in form of heat. And this is represented in those gray bars. So summarizing that, more or less surprisingly, is German produced hydrogen is quite competitive when you compare that, at least for 2030, by hydrogen coming from the very cheap production of Northern Africa. And then you see when you want to transport hydrogen, and that has been said before, and if you can do that in a pipeline, please do so. Do not think of converting it to anything. Conversion and reconversion of hydrogen almost doubles the cost, as you can see here. So then maybe some last slide from my side. We've been speaking a lot of Cromarty and hearing many good info on progress there. So I took the liberty to add one more bar that has not been published in our study. I just expanded our model a bit, and I tried to put in values for how about if we produce hydrogen from offshore wind in the Port of Cromarty and ship that in form of synthetic methane to Germany. So same case as before. And you can see here, this hydrogen based on offshore wind in Scotland is competitive to PV-based hydrogen from Northern Africa by 2030. If you can do the transport via pipeline, it's even better. So that's really should be a good sign for all the export efforts that are being done in the hydrogen hubs all around Scotland. And I'd like to close my presentation now with, if we want to start this, and I think it's not an if, but an when and how can we start it, we need to rely on existing technology and we need to rely on existing infrastructure. Otherwise, we're just too slow. We have been wasting time already. Let's not do that again. Let's start with what we have today. So thanks very much. Also looking forward to your questions.
Sebastian, thank you very much. And what we'll do now, if we can, is to get the all of the speakers on the screen. Welcome back. And we've got a good number of questions coming in. Many of the questions are touching on the question of, how do you move the hydrogen from where you make it to where you use it? So, very much a question of which carrier, be that liquid hydrogen, ammonia, pipeline hydrogen, methanol, synthetic methane. So lots and lots of different options. I think sort of maybe a question. Let's start off with you, Tim. In terms of the work that you're doing, how do you see? And if we can keep these nice and short, because we've got a few questions to get through. How do you see the different options for moving hydrogen from the Storegga perspective and from the point of view of the whisky distilleries?
Yes, I think it's been, as touched on a bit through the presentations as well, is if you can produce the hydrogen close to the point of use and to be able to distribute that through pipeline, it's the most cost-effective thing to do and the most practical and safest route to go as well. As I've mentioned in my presentation, we're having to use compressed hydrogen in tube trailer. We are trying to use it in its gaseous form, though, rather than converting it into any carrier. But as Sebastian has said, when you're looking to then export and move from one country to another significant quantities, then we need to look at some more effective liquid carrier. But again, if we can progress through to pipelines, then that's the way to go.
Thanks, Tim. And Sebastian, you mentioned the Salzgitter, report, Green Hydrogen Salzgitter report, and David, you touched on the Scott-to-Jur report that has been carried out with Wood and Scottish Power. I guess a question, to start with you, David, but I'll come to you, Sebastian. What are the opportunities to start to maybe join some dots here and actually see the opportunities from both the Scottish and the Bavarian perspective?
I think the opportunity is basically in the Scott-to-Jur proposition, which is to, as Sebastian saying, we need to ramp up very quickly here, both for the purposes of energy security in Germany, and also because some of the technology is still to be developed. So I think the principal approach of the Bavarian government, as I said at the beginning of my presentation, is to import the hydrogen and export the technology. And this initiative to match the companies here, and there's tremendous expertise here, especially in fields of research and so forth over many years, match that with the capabilities in Scotland and the resources in Scotland. And I think MIN Energy Solutions is a great example of the kind of company that needs to be active in Scotland and will benefit, will profit from engagement in Scotland.
Thanks, David. And Sebastian, a lot of discussion, a lot of questions in the chat about this question of what form you do move the hydrogen in. And to what extent do you think it's actually you need to go to the customer and find out more from the customer in terms of what they're planning to use the hydrogen for?
Definitely, and maybe one option to also do the market ramp up and to solve this chicken and egg is that all of those three carriers I showed in our analysis, they do have markets for their own. So of course, natural gas is a very large market, is in high need of any sources that can be brought up quickly. Ammonia has a large market in fertilizers. Methanol is one of the most important basic chemicals. So there might be also the very interesting possibility to produce that carrier in a large amount, so ramp up the production quite quickly, and only convert parts of that when you have reached your destination country, only parts of that back to hydrogen and serve the customers here. And the rest of those carriers could serve their respective markets directly without doing any reconversion. So that would, in our opinion, help really much to gain speed here.
Thanks, Sebastian. I like that idea. You end up not doing the reconversion bit, so the overall efficiency becomes more attractive. And Joanne, coming to the port's perspective, one of the questions was very much about the risks of handling some of these materials, ammonia in particular. Is this something that you can take into account when you're looking at Port of Cromarty Firth? Does the space allow you to do things at Port of Cromarty Firth that might otherwise be difficult?
I don't think our port is probably any different to any other ports in that regard. We will all have to look at the carriers that people want to use and then put in the relevant safety requirements to handle those carriers. And as Sebastian has said, these carriers are used already around the world. So, a lot of this technology and a lot of the safety precautions already exist. It's just a case of putting them into place for the green versions. But I don't think we haven't handled so much hydrogen as so much ammonia as a port, but obviously lots of other ports have. So, there's a lot of lessons already out there. We're obviously not massive fans of pipelines because that means that we don't get ships in and out of our port, which is how the ports make their money. But I completely understand the need for scale, particularly with this sector. But we hope that there'll still be some short sea shipping, perhaps, to move it around as well.
Oh, absolutely. And Carolyn, one of the questions that came up in the chat was very much around, can we start to harmonize codes and standards, and is this an area that we can actually start working on? And from the Scottish Hydrogen Fuel Cell Association perspective, we see this as being critical. We wouldn't be wanting to develop standards that were completely different from other locations. And I'll put it over to you, but maybe there are some opportunities here for the associations to what can we do to actually help our members identify where we can join together some of these codes and standards, joint working groups, and similar activities to take this forward.
Yes, exactly. I totally agree with you. And yeah, the topic about standardization, I guess that's a topic that has to be discussed on a European level, not just between Bavaria and Scotland. So it's a really big topic. But anyway, I think companies and institutions should have the say in this. And therefore, we offer multiple options. So we can offer information and the possibility for networking. We also have a series of events. For example, one is called H2 Insights, where we cover exactly these kinds of topics. So we invite all our partners and also the partners from Shefka to come together and talk about this, and then we can give our information back to the governments as well, and then maybe we have an impact there.
And I think this format of webinars can be very effective in starting to share this information quickly, but it absolutely does not replace the opportunities to actually get together in person. And we had our annual conference last week, and that was a great time to actually get people back together in the room. And just to really start to wrap up today's event, so apologies for running slightly late, and I hope you found the session useful. This event has been part of the European Hydrogen Week. It's a side event for European Hydrogen Week, and we're delighted to be taking part in this joint event with the Hydrogen Center Bavaria. If you happen to be in Brussels later this week, there are more events happening in Brussels. There are also more events happening online this week. So do take the opportunity to go and look at what's going on, both in Brussels and online. And if you can join, please do. I'd now like to take the opportunity to thank all of our speakers for taking part in the discussion. There's a wealth of information that they've shared with us. So the presentations will be circulated to all of the registered participants after the event. We're also recording the event, and we hope to be able to circulate a link to the recording so you can actually go back and pick out the highlights of this morning's webinar. So on behalf of all of us, I'd like to thank you all for taking part, and hope you'll be able to join us for similar events in the future. Thank you very much, and have a good day.
Bye.